Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everyone, I am so delighted to introduce you to my guest today, Dr. James Richardson. James is the founder of Premium Growth Solutions, a strategic planning consultancy for early-stage consumer packaged goods brands. As a professionally trained cultural anthropologist turned business strategist, he has helped more than 75 consumer packaged goods brands with their strategic planning. James is the author of Ramping Your Brand, How to Ride the Killer CPG Growth Curve, and he is the host of his own podcast, Startup Confidential. Please join me in welcoming Dr. James Richardson. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me.
So as you know, Work from the Inside Out is a podcast all about transitions that people have made in their professional lives, and you have certainly made several really interesting transitions in your life. Take us back to some of the earlier years where you started and how that got you to where you are now, or maybe how it didn't get you to where you are now, but certainly want people to learn about your earlier years and then how that has evolved to where you are now.
Great. Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. Now, this is the time for everyone to strap in their belts. This is what we call a non-linear narrative.
Well, I will tell you, a lot of people have a non-linear narrative, so it's true. But I will say yours is particularly interesting, for sure.
So I began I guess we'll call it my adult life, as a cultural anthropologist. And that, for those of you who aren't familiar with that particular field, we focus on, American anthropologists at least focus on the analysis of value systems, symbol systems, and how those do or do not get enacted. And that broad, super big generalization can cover thousands and thousands of topics, whether it's race relations or, like I studied, how caste identity is projected in modern urban India. That's how I started off. And just also so folks know, that was a 9-year journey to get the Ph.D. Anthropology, especially my branch of it, is known for painful and protracted journey to clip and high death rate, not literally, but just a high quit rate.
Oh, wow.
I won't go into why, but it's usually a very painful, long process. And it's also very lonely, to be honest with you, because we are, unlike aid workers or the military, we don't work in groups. So, we're much more like the CIA, which I was often accused of being a member of when I lived in India by anybody who had some grudge against me. So, because you're inserting yourself in a community all by yourself. Right?
I see.
You have yourself and yourself to hold your hand.
I see.
When things go wrong. I don't know, for those of you who've lived abroad, you understand what that felt like. If you did it for more than 3 months, you know what it's like.
Yeah.
Because the locals, whoever they are, whether it's Spain or India, doesn't matter. They can only empathize so much. They don't really get it.
Yeah. How long were you in India?
Almost 3 years.
Oh, that's a long time.
Yeah. But I made a lot of good friends. I think it's India's very extroverted culture.
Uh-huh.
Some people say that about the US, but I don't see it quite the same way. I think we're actually quite antisocial. Mm-hmm. We'll come back to that because that has to do with our individualist obsession.
Yes, right. And I remember when we had our initial conversation before the interview, you made some interesting distinctions between the way we focus on individualism here in the U.S. and how distinct that is from the culture in India. And I found that interesting, both in terms of your work as an anthropologist, but also I think how it shows up in a lot of workplaces and how that affects, I think, us here in the US and how that affects our careers. And I think you were able to point to some of that in terms of some of the different career steps that you've taken as well, that those insights that you gathered as an anthropologist definitely shined a light on some of the stages you went through in your career.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Sure. So I did the academic track. I wanted to be a professor from the age of 16. I didn't see coming what was coming. And that was, closing out my Ph.D. That actually went fairly smoothly and quickly. But as I was doing it, I realized I was disenchanted with the field in a lot of my academic peers. But there was that, and then there was also just a horrendous job market in the early 2000s. Those who know people who've been on the tenure track know that it's actually very difficult in the humanities to get a tenure track job.
Yes, it is, especially in this day and age.
Right.
Yeah.
So even getting to the point of beginning the journey is almost impossible.
Right.
And I had made some mistakes, to be honest, looking back on it. And the big one was I didn't do any networking.
Aha.
I was also never told to do any. I was only told to just publish articles. Of course, you can't get published if you didn't network, because everyone on the review committee, they know each other. It's actually not an objective process. I failed there, and then I had to live with those consequences. But luckily I was getting tired of some of the discourse in the field. And so I had other motives to leave, but I didn't know what to do. So I'll be really honest. It was pretty close to a nervous breakdown, I would say.
Oh, wow.
That was in 2002. I was living alone in an apartment, unmarried, without an animal, whose belly you can at least rub. Is not exactly the right situation to make a career change.
Well, especially when you've worked for so many years towards something that you thought was going to be your life's work, and you find yourself without that to focus on.
So you're right. And I emailed one of my college thesis advisor, who was a tenured anthropologist. He shall remain anonymous, but I emailed him. In the nadir of my depression, and that's exactly what it was. And I said, I'm not sure how to think through this, because basically my head is not clear. I'm not sure. I want to make this decision intelligently, but I'm not sure how to think through it.
Sure.
Have your peers have you talked with other people who left the field and why they did? And his response wasn't very helpful. At first, it didn't seem that way at first, but it actually was. What he did was he replied and said, look, most people I know who wanted to quit never did, because they had the sunk costs in the investment of their time. It's too great. And so they couldn't let it go. That's actually what he said. It was very insightful, because he's an anthropologist. It was very insightful. On the surface, not super helpful. Like, he didn't actually answer my question. And it made me realize that beneath his statement was the fact that everyone he was referring to, whoever the hell they were obviously too terrified to let it go. Too terrified. In my case, it was 9 years of an investment. I almost got killed twice in India.
Wow.
I was drugged and abducted in a restaurant early on in my time there. And I pushed through all of that and made it happen. But so, you go through things like that. And you don't want to let it go. I spent 5 years becoming fluent in a very difficult language. I didn't want to let go of that either. So, but I said, you can't make life decisions like this. It intuitively clicked with me that you just don't make life decisions.
Mm-hmm. Curious though, you very generously and candidly just described that you were in a state of what sounds like a deep depression.
Absolutely.
But yet when you reached out to your old thesis advisor and you didn't get much of a decent response, the lack thereof actually spurred you on to some action, it sounds like, or to some other decision which I think is kind of an important step, given that sometimes when people are that depressed, it can actually make them even more depressed in some ways.
Oh yeah. Now I've had anxiety, generalized anxiety all my life. I didn't figure that out until I was about 34 or 5.
Uh-huh.
Not social anxiety, but generalized, which is a very different thing. In other words, I can talk myself into an anxious state alone in a closet.
Uh-huh.
Which is actually in many ways more debilitating if it's not under control. And it's actually not that uncommon amongst intellectuals. Because we just overthink everything. And so I think when I went through this process of leaving academia, I could reflect on the fact that I survived that.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And I remember at one point telling myself, if you can get through that, James, like this can't, come on. It's like you have all these advantages. You have to be able to figure out a career that will somehow make you partially happy in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is I also had the privilege of living in the third world was that it also kept me from spiraling into like the worst possible species that you'll ever encounter is a self-pitying, affluent white male.
Yeah.
Don't want to meet those people.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I refused to become that because I lived in a country where people couldn't get their entire family fed
right.
on a regular basis.
Right.
They live next door to me.
Right.
So, like my career problem wasn't the end of the universe.
You had a stark perspective to reflect on.
That's unusual, but very helpful.
No, very helpful. And I think it's helpful that you share it here because I do think that sometimes we here in the US, when we think we're in the depths of despair, I often will say to people, that's a first world problem. Let's put it in perspective.
I think it might help anybody who's in that situation to do the equivalent of what I did, which is go sign up for some volunteering in the inner city, but not for an hour.
Right.
Like go for one of those. I mean, there's organizations that will insert you and get you involved very intensively, and whether it's Habitat for Humanity or anything else. But I think even more than Habitat, something that's actually going to force you to interact with people who are in survival mode in the United States, because you didn't have to go to India to experience what I did. Then it can help you recalibrate and get you out of your head. And then you realize, oh yeah, that's a really disappointing problem that I have.
Right.
But in the grander scheme of things, I should be able to get through this. In fact, I know I can get through.
But I think what you're suggesting is that it's important to get a perspective on your own issues in light of the range of possible scenarios that are out there in people's lives, even in this country, that can occur to anyone. And know that to give yourself even a little more credit that you are capable of moving through a very difficult time.
In terms of back to my journey, and when I decided to go into market research because it was the best application of my literal skills.
How did you discover that? How did you discover that connection?
I did a lot of informational interviewing. I got a book. Funny, I found this book by an English Ph.D. She was only a few years older than me, and I can't remember the name of it. And I also lost it on an airplane, but I had read it. And it was a book on non-academic careers for academics.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And it came out around 2001, 2002, perfectly timed. I devoured it on an airplane ride and then promptly left it in the seat pocket. And there were some tactics in there, but most of all, it was a proof point that, someone else did it and they wound up on the other side and they're okay. And that's all I really needed at that moment.
Yeah.
That's all I really needed was I just had to know that it wasn't James Richardson deciding to become a non-academic anthropologist. And then my thesis advisor's large list of people who couldn't bring themselves to leave the field. So then I started meeting those people. I'm like, oh, it's not just one. It's like, there's tons of anthropologists who left the field. And they eat. They can pay their rent.
Wow.
Fascinating. Now, I went through and sort of did my little over-analytical thing and put them in little buckets, little career buckets, and then I analyzed them and said, I don't interested in that one. So then I would pick the ones I was interested in and do informational interviews. Some of those. So I looked harder, and I found a company in Bellevue that was actually had a job posting for ethnographic research, and that's what cultural anthropologists do.
Oh, wow.
And they wanted a Ph.D. And they weren't the only job posting like that at the time. So I just FedExed I said, these are rare opportunities. I already knew that. So just I spent the $30 and I FedExed my resume, and I spent like an hour writing a stand-up comic cover letter to try to break through the noise. I didn't realize that there weren't a lot of applications.
Mm-hmm.
But in my depressed state, I was imagining 700 PhD resumes on her desk.
Right.
So I did it. I got a phone call the next day. And then I was like, anybody who knows Chris Voss, I've been reading his negotiation.
Oh, yeah.
If they call that quickly, like you've already got leverage.
Yeah.
You can go in hard. So, they're like smoking desperate. And they were.
Wow.
And I basically walked right into that job. I basically wrote my job.
Wow.
Now, I wasn't able to negotiate my salary because I had no record, but I think it was a very easy process because I was perfectly aligned for that organization.
Now, how long had you been doing the informational interviewing and all that till you found that particular position?
I did for a year, and I contracted. I was doing contract research for a design firm.
You were?
Yeah, just to get myself out of the apartment.
Uh-huh.
And that kept my brain somewhat stimulated, but I wasn't making a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
but it was something. I'm also curious, since you were talking about how alone you felt in so many ways. Was it helpful as you were doing the informational interviewing to find out that there were quite a few other former academics that were out there also in private industry, also doing other kinds of work? Was that at all reassuring to you, or made you feel a little less alone?
A decent career, and they didn't seem depressed. And so I found a firm that was interested in my resume, interested in the academic training.
Yeah.
To some degree. I didn't really know to what degree until I got there.
Right.
But that allowed me to go in in a better mood and join that company. And
yeah.
I think market research, that the Harvard Group was trying to do very cutting edge social science research for consumer packaged goods companies, and honestly for natural organic brands and retailers at the time. So our big intellectual capital exercise was trying to explain to executives and industry leaders why people were trading up to natural organic foods, which categories and why, what are the drivers, what are the barriers, besides price.
Right.
Which is the obvious one. But I think that, it seemed like a company that was poised to do something kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And the timing of the company was perfect. I was employee number 14, so it was like joining a startup. And I grew with the company. I grew with the company as it scaled up and became a senior executive there. So my timing was so lucky.
And you were there for a long time. You left there a few years ago. You really did grow with the company, and really were able to carve quite a path for yourself there.
Yeah, and I think that journey is where most of my professional development happened, obviously. Once I got through that honeymoon period, then there came a process of coming to terms with the business world. And that was basically very awkward. Yeah. For me. And I think it was awkward for my other social science colleagues. And it was certainly awkward for the management who had to deal with us.
Yeah. And yet they wanted you for your academic background.
Yes, because they needed, the founder wanted people who were going to, help him develop intellectual capital, is what they call it in consulting, that would allow him to sell, to executives and get high billable business. His motives were more financial, but he was smart enough to realize that he didn't have the ideas.
Yeah.
right? And that's not always true. Usually, often the founder of these kinds of companies is the thought leader, but in this case, it wasn't. So he had to hire the thought leaders,
Right.
Somehow. And unfortunately, in the market that he was in, he didn't have the luxury of stealing people from Bain and McKinsey. That was not going to happen in a million years. So he had to take what they call raw, undeveloped talent, and that would be me.
So how did that? You said it got awkward. How did you navigate that awkwardness? How did that evolve? Because you were there for 15 years, so clearly you made it work.
It was awkward because, and I'm going to put the blame on myself here because I think that's the smartest thing to do. And not so much blame, but just let's keep the focus on me. I had a lot of, from a business perspective, I had a lot of bad habits that academics have. And the number one bad habit that an academic has is they don't say anything verbally until they've spent a couple weeks looking at the issue. And if you know anything about business communications, pausing, Tammy, is deadly. Pausing equals hesitancy, equals fool, equals, oh my God, why did I hire these people? And that thought process takes about 30 seconds. So correctly, the management of my company didn't really bring us onto a lot of client calls, if any. Part of it was that I had a very aggressive academic conversational style. It was very debate-oriented. It was very truth-seeking as opposed to what you need in consulting, in business consulting, which is your focus is on solving the client's problem. But honestly, from a business perspective, from the firm's perspective, your goal in the conversation is to make them emotionally convinced, make them emotionally comfortable throughout the journey of the project, such that they just have an intrinsic faith in the team, no matter what the PowerPoint says. And that, for many years, it bothered me as an intellectual. But the funny thing is, the founder was very good at cutting through that with me when we traveled together, and I did have a lot of time with him, which helped. He would say things like, James, these people retain 5% of what's in your deck. Max. It's so much more important, how you present it and the way you talk to them.
Right.
And you spend way too much time filling the deck.
Mm-hmm.
Because what does an intellectual do? Well, we write footnotes. So it's
right.
And I'm sitting there going, but Harvey, they don't read it. They're not listening half the time, James. And so at first, this was actually more disillusioning than helpful because it just made my client, it made my career look like I was working for bumbling fools. Mm. And that's actually how I took it for a couple of years. I was like, the clients are the problem. I went there pretty fast.
And how useful was that, James?
That was very unuseful. So, and I think there was an intervention which forced me to realize that I had to get past that. So I hired a professional to help me with that. And I think that, what came out of that work was the fact that there actually was a problem for me career-wise with the client base, but it still didn't make the reaction to it remotely appropriate. Mm-hmm. So the management was both right and they were wrong. Well, they were right and I was right. And this is not unusual, I think, for people who get stuck, right? Is that I entered the company thinking X would happen because I was ignorant, basically, right? And I was young, and I wanted to believe what I wanted to believe.
Sure.
I wanted to believe that Kraft and General Mills would hire anthropologists to do this very authentic anthropological, insightful analysis. And, it wouldn't be very different from academia, right? That's what I wanted to have. The problem and the benefit for me was that I had, and this is part of my advice to listeners, is that if you're in one of these situations where you have the ability to, say you have a core set of responsibilities, but you also are allowed the opportunity to do something totally different, whether it's, in my case, it was a different kind of client. even if it terrifies you, try it, because you may find that the real career you need to be on is over there on the side.
Yeah.
And if you dabble in that for a while, you'll be able to network and maneuver your way to that, which is much more productive than sitting stuck with your core responsibilities and complaining to everybody around you, including your partner. It accomplishes nothing.
Yeah.
The only thing that will get you forward is to try something different
Yeah.
in the organization you're already in, right? So what I did was, I just decided that I would sign that my punishment, self-imposed punishment for complaining about our core client base, was that I would take on terrifying work with marketing executives and CMOs. I was super introverted and not shy, but introverted, very sensitive.
Yeah.
My boss used to call me, "Oh, you're so sensitive." So these guys would terrify me because they were like the epitome of the varsity quarterback dude who I had zero respect for in high school, after high school, and right at that moment. Now, the funny thing is that actually some of them are actually very smart.
Yeah.
They just happen to go get an MBA and they're the CMO of blank, right?
Right.
And what I quickly realized was when I started working with executives in our industry, I found the whole thing a lot more engaging.
Oh, interesting.
I'm like, oh, wow, there's actually intelligent people in business. Because up until then, the client base that we had was operating at a different level in the organization. I'll call it the bottom. They can't tie their shoelaces without approval. When I started working with the VPs of marketing, the brand managers, the general managers, and eventually with the C-level people, it was very interesting.
Yeah.
The questions they were asking had huge importance. And they also required a very, very high-powered analytic and synthetic mind, which is that's the kind of thing that excites an intellectual.
Right.
And so I ended up dabbling in that, and we weren't very good at consistently selling that work until I raised my hand and said, I want to have permission to go try doing that and creating a consulting arm, And I was given that permission, and we made several $1 million off that before, for other reasons it was wound down. But I think being able to just at some point identify what it is about the current work that's bothering you, and then trying other things almost on a lark, not because you have some plan, but just trying them, and then happening randomly almost upon, like I could never have sat there when I started at the company and said, you know what I need to do? I need to work with a CMO because, man, that's going to be awesome.
Right.
If you had asked me, if you had suggested that to me when I showed up at that company, I would have literally gone on a rant. Yeah, and I think you have to be, the cliche word is pivot, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily inapt here, but I think, and that's what we're talking about, right? So I pivoted into a consulting role, and I just built a revenue stream with the help initially of the founder of the company, because he's a much better salesperson than I was. And then I got pretty good.
And then you decided your time was up there, huh?
Yeah, I decided we did, some of that was, sometimes it's just time to leave the organization. You've been there a long time. I wanted more independence over my schedule. I have 2 kids with special needs. They're not the kind you're imagining stereotypically, but it's exhausting enough that we wanted to have a little more. We needed somebody in the house with flex time. We needed people. I felt I wanted to work on my own terms.
Yeah.
The reality is that I was probably, just because of my background and whatever, I was probably always going to be a force fit into office life.
Yeah.
And I could deconstruct that to the end of time, rightly or wrongly, but I think I'm not alone. I don't think you have to be like me, like an ex-academic, to feel that way in offices. And we talked about this before, and I'll bring it up now because I think that for people who are younger, I think it's important in your 20s to take some huge risks.
Yeah.
Just massive personal and psychological risks. In dabbling in a few things, working on some core skill sets so that you're really good at a couple different things, and pivoting a few times, I think, is totally acceptable at this point.
Yep.
But doing that earlier than I did, please don't wait till you're 35 to, I wouldn't recommend that. And that was the result of me being excessively stubborn. Right? So I think everybody listening can do better than that timeline, I think. But I think being able to have those different kinds of work experiences, because here's the deal. Sociologically, very few Americans work in a Fortune 100 company.
Right.
Very few post-grad educated people work in a Fortune 100 company, right? And that's the elite of the elite, right? Most MBAs and JDs, they work in small offices.
Yes, that's
right?
true.
And those have their own dynamics, right? But they're actually a lot easier to deal with as a human being than the dynamics of a big bureaucracy. Our species is not set up for bureaucracy. And if you don't believe me, just do the math. We've had bureaucracy for 5,000 years. We've had Homo sapiens for 5 million.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think that our genes have evolved and our brains have evolved to network at that level of complexity and political complexity, you're wrong. And my next step proof point is that is why we have podcasts like this, people like Tammy, and 1,000 other coaches to help you get through it.
I didn't know that.
The takeaway, because it just doesn't come naturally.
Yeah.
Like the young deer learns to walk. That's automatic. A lot of people would be better off, I think, learning earlier in their life that they're going to be happier in a smaller environment, or they may be happier running their own business.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, coming from that Ivy League especially the Ivy League background, the whole environment at the Ivy League and those elite universities is pushing you to, go to Amazon, go work at Facebook, go. I can't tell you the insanity I see around me amongst young people, like everyone, and it's reinforced everywhere. The U.S. News and World Report, top companies to work for, and it's all these Fortune 100 companies.
Right.
The odds of you ever getting the job there are very low to begin with. Second of all, my point is that, the average person, I don't know that they're going to be super, super happy long-term there. Even if they learn something, they're very strange places. And I do. So you're right. I was privileged because I worked I think we peaked at 50 at that company.
Yeah.
It never got larger than 50 people. And that gave me I got there early, so I was able to create a relationship with a founder. And that's really important, because even if you don't get along with your founder or your CEO, it's amazing. It's amazing if you could put your hat on and say, well, what can I learn from this person, even though I wouldn't have beer with them? Because that's what opened my eyes, and that's what gave me the opportunity to take some leaps and to do some things.
Yeah.
That eventually led to a career that was more satisfying for me, and I was working directly with business leaders. And now I work with startups.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about what you're doing now, and also about your book, Ramping Your Brand, How to Ride the Killer CPG Growth Curve. Tell us a little bit about the book, and tell us about what you're doing now.
So I left my executive position as a consultant at this small boutique market research firm, and took some of the learnings that I had into the private sector. And so I obviously talked to you about my personal motivations, but I think part of my career motivations for leaving was that I developed a lot of insight around best practices for fast-growing food and beverage brands, the kind that are hip and cool and make everyone, they're hit at the party, right? So I wanted to help them because I saw lots of mistakes. And I wanted to find a way to share what I had learned, because I don't feel like, and I still don't feel like that should be the purview of big elite institutions, right? I think, if you're willing to go out and put your life savings into a business, I think you deserve some help.
Yeah.
Maybe you need some psychological help too, but I think you should get some help. I think you should actually get some practical help.
Yeah. Well, that's you're trying to help them practically on the practical side is what I mean.
Yeah. So I wrote my book is called Ramping Your Brand, and it's trading on a skateboard metaphor. And And some of you may not understand skateboarding very well, but there's four kinds of skateboarding. And the one that you're thinking of when I say skateboarding is called vert. And it's the stuff they do at Venice Beach, where they're going up and down these smooth curved walls and doing aerial flips that make you think they're going to die. It's extremely terrifying, and it's very complicated to learn how to do vert skateboarding. So it's the one, and it's also the kind that gets all the television glory, right? So if you go to a skate park, there will be various kinds of ramps, but there'll be these nonlinear curved ones, and they're called quarter pipes, right? And it basically looks like the front half of an S curve, right? And the first part of it's pretty easy, and then you start going vertical real fast, and then basically we find out whether you have it or you don't have it. Because the newbie lands on their butt, but the kid who knows what he's doing goes right up over the lip and lands beautifully on his board, right? Or her board. So the book is anchored in that metaphor because it's a book about how to plan and achieve and sustain exponential growth. And I picked that not because it's sexy to say exponential growth, but because at the Harvard Group before I left, we studied over 100 brands, premium brands that had gotten to 9 figures or larger. So they had scaled. And we reverse engineered what they did and what that ramp up looked like. And 3/4 of the time, it was an exponential growth ramp. And so then we said, well, what are they doing? So we went into the math and we went into the tactics, and that's what the book talks about. And it's designed to help highly ambitious founders out there who want to grow fast, but they also, their dad isn't Daddy Warbucks. They're not starting with $10 million. They're going to have to do seed raises and self-fund this. It's designed to teach them how to make that happen in a capital efficient process and to minimize the risk of face planting, which is quite high in consumer packaged goods.
No, it's a fabulous resource. And I have several people in mind who I think can benefit greatly from it.
Awesome.
And so you've got your book, which came out fairly recently, and in your consulting practice. So you're working with some of these companies.
Yeah, I work across the early stage continuum from anywhere from 0 to 75 million in trailing sales. Most companies are selling below $1 million. My sweet spot is probably the guys who have a 7-figure business, or gals. There's more and more women doing well now, and so
wow.
They're getting a lot more help and funding. So it's getting a lot more equitable. It's getting more equitable than the C-suite, I'll tell you that.
Great.
So it's fun to work with these guys, especially the really motivated ones, I think.
So, James Richardson, I want to thank you for being on Work from the Inside Out, and I want to wish you all the best going forward with your book and your consulting practice.
Thank you.
I really want to thank you for your generosity today and all that you've shared about your story and all the ups and downs and the advice that you've given our listeners. I think there's a lot that they can do with that. And I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here today.
And thank you for having me, Tammy. It was a lot of fun, actually. It's always therapeutic. Isn't it sad? It's therapeutic to talk about yourself.
I get that from a lot of people, actually. I hope you enjoyed my interview with James Richardson. It was so interesting to speak with him and learn about his professional path to where he is today. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? Is there something you'll put into action that you'll benefit from for years to come? Share what resonated with you in the show notes at workfromtheinsideout.com. Look for episode 066. That's also where you'll find all the links and resources from today's podcast. If you enjoyed this episode with James, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at www.tammygoularloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button or follow the instructions provided there. Thanks so much for listening, and remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. And who knows, maybe you'll be my next interview on this podcast. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.